Hey guys, the purpose of this challenge today is to help you to be able to overcome the barriers. Sometimes you might think of it as the wall, like marathon runners face, where there's a certain point in trying to execute on tasks that are not intrinsically rewarding to you, where you start to face a wall, where it's really more of a willpower, self-discipline wall, where you don't want to keep pushing past it. It's very difficult to make yourself keep focusing. I'm going to tell you the story of one of my clients who recently broke past that wall and what he experienced on the other side, because it may be relevant to your goals to help you achieve what you're truly capable of. So first, let me just remind you of just the simple concept of what the wall is, at least on the physical side, which is really just an analogy because it's a little bit of a different mechanism of action than what you experience on the psychological side when trying to do tasks that don't release dopamine, that don't have that intrinsically rewarding aspect to them. So in a marathon, it's usually somewhere around mile 18 to 20, where a person hits the wall, and you can sometimes see a person visibly slow down at that point. And researchers think that it's probably at the point where your body has exhausted its glycogen store. So glycogen, if you're not sure, is that essentially a carbohydrate store within the muscle that's used up as energy. And at that point, if you can push past the wall, your body's probably switching over to burning fat to be able to finish that race. And there's usually a second wind that comes as you make that transition, and you're no longer running on the easy to access energy, and you've switched over to a longer term energy source. Well, when it comes to the psychological side of things, it's not about glycogen. It's really about willpower. And I've told you this before, but for those of you who haven't perhaps been exposed to this idea, on the psychological side, what we find is that it's really about willpower. And willpower is, to some degree, a resource that can be depleted. There is some aspect of the analogy that your willpower is kind of like a gas tank in your car. And once it's empty, you've got to give it some time to refill before you can use it again. But that analogy only goes so far. The more recent research suggests that willpower really acts more like an emotion than it does like a fuel tank or like a muscle that can get depleted and needs to rest so that it can grow and become stronger the next time you use it after that period of rest. So as an example, what we find is that you don't run out of anger or joy or happiness. And those are emotions that emerge depending on the circumstances of your current environment and the story you're telling yourself about those circumstances, the narrative running in the back of your mind about what's coming next in your life. Those unlock various emotions. In the same way, willpower is influenced by what's happening in your world, what you're telling yourself, this narrative about what it means, what you're working on right now. And so I'm going to show you how you can use that to break past the wall. But first, let me just tell you the story of one of my clients who achieved this recently. So he's a person who, probably more so than most of you, has really struggled with just basic motivation, getting himself to sit down and do the stuff he knows he wants to do and needs to do to push his business forward. But he often gets stuck in this loop of finding that, oh, I don't always follow through on things. And it's kind of an all or nothing thought, like I tried this and it didn't work. So I guess that just doesn't work for me. And what he was missing was that his brain was playing tricks on him. Because one of the things that our brains, our biology is designed to do is to help us to have instincts to conserve energy. And focused concentration burns a lot of energy. That takes a lot of energy from your body, literal energy that's being used up by your brain. And so you have some instincts to pull back on that, to hold back on using up your willpower and your focused attention. And so because of that instinct, when you start to approach that wall where you start feeling depleted from focus and you want to go do something that's more of a dopamine releasing, exciting activity, something interesting happens if we can shift your motivation away so that it's no longer about finding what's the most comfortable and instead allowing yourself to turn down the internal mental resistance dial. And this is a concept that comes out of an advanced form of cognitive behavioral therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, where we found that with physical pain, with anxiety, with depression, there can be significant improvement in a person's quality of life and real life functioning if you can turn down the resistance to the things you don't like. For example, if my toe is hurting really badly because I just broke it, but I still have to walk myself out of a jungle where I've gotten far from civilization and I don't have any way to call for help, If I can turn down the resistance dial, in other words, allow myself to feel the pain in my toe and not wince away from it and wish it wasn't there, oddly enough, I actually experience, psychologically anyway, I experience less pain. And this is something that's been found to be helpful for people with bone cancer, which is extremely resistant to pain medications, for example. This is a technique that if you can turn down the internal mental resistance dial to feeling the pain, that's one of the best things you can do to boost a person's quality of life. So what does this have to do with my client's story? Well, he had this tendency to work on things until he felt this pushback from his own internal desire to stray away from things that are uncomfortable. And he would always use that as the evidence that it wasn't working. The self-discipline or psychological strategy wasn't working. But I kept pushing him to say, let's find out what happens if you just allow yourself to feel that discomfort. And then there was a week between our coaching sessions where he did that. He allowed himself to feel the discomfort, and he's like, you know what? I don't even care if I feel discomfort. I'm so disgusted with myself for not breaking through this barrier that I'm just going to do it anyway. And what happened is about 12 minutes later, he noticed that he was flying through his work and he no longer felt the resistance, because that resistance was a mirage. It often is a mirage. It's as if your mind is throwing up this scary monster saying, don't go down this path. There's nothing to see over here. And it's trying to get you to back down and rest. But if you pass through that mirage, you often find that now the fear's gone and now you can really move towards your goals. Similar to the marathon runner getting to the wall and thinking they can't go on, but then the body switches over to the fat burning mechanism and suddenly you can go on. Well, here in the psychological aspect of this, if you face that resistance internally and you're able to recognize it for what it is, there's something that you can do. I call it the shift. So let's talk about the shift. The shift is something that happens when, well, let me give you an example, something you might be able to relate to more easily. You're watching a Rocky movie. The traditional theme of the Rocky scenario is he faces somebody who's a significant adversary. That after a lot of build-up, he's in the ring with them. They're beating him to a pulp. He's down on the ground. He can barely get up. And then he glances up and he sees someone he cares about out there in the crowd. And something turns in his motivation. And it's now no longer about trying to look good or trying to win. It's just pure power. Something shifts in the narrative. And he finds the strength to push himself up. And the audience, you start to get goosebumps, because what's happening to you is you are mirroring, your mirror neurons are allowing you to start to experience a little bit of that moment with him as you get engaged in that story. And what those goosebumps are coming from is the endorphin release through your body that causes you to be a little bit more immune to pain. Just like the endorphin release that comes from the runner's high or lifting weights, you feel stronger. And suddenly, as he stands up, something has shifted. He's no longer afraid of getting punched in the jaw. There's something that is steel in the way he approaches the opponent. And he's able to break through and have the victory, and we all celebrate in the end, right? But when it comes to you practicing this art of pushing past that wall of experiencing low self-discipline or diminished willpower to push past something, if you recognize that wall and you say to yourself, I'm no longer going to try to make a decision based on getting that feeling to go away. Instead, you start thinking, I'm going to turn down the resistance to feeling it, and I'm going to pass right through it. It's similar to what it feels like to me when I'm standing in the shower and I want to do a 2-minute cold shower, turning it all the way down to cold. And I know how uncomfortable it is when that cold water first hits. If I was just to go based on what my instincts and emotions are telling me, I would never turn it to the cold side. But because I know what's coming next, I turn down the resistance dial. I shift from what's going to feel good to I am in command. My hand is going to do what I want it to do, regardless of what that feeling is telling me to do. I've made the shift. I'm no longer going based on an instinctual emotion. And I turn that water down, and something has changed in me to where, yes, I feel the discomfort, but it's like I've turned down the resistance to feeling it, because my narrative is I will pass through this because there's something on the other side I want to get to. So here's your challenge. This week, I want you to watch for the wall, because it will come up at some point, unless you just have an adrenaline-filled week ahead of you where you're doing nothing but fun conferences and networking or something that you really truly enjoy. you're probably going to have some mundane tasks that need to get done. And if you could get them done faster with less internal resistance, you get towards your goals faster. And so when that moment comes, the first thing is just to notice it, to label it for what it is. That's the wall. That's just a mirage. If I turn down the resistance dial in my mind to trying to not feel that discomfort and I push through, I will discover a renewed, deeper reservoir of self-discipline and willpower on the other side. And then I'll be able to fly. And this will improve your overall confidence in yourself. You'll have a greater sense of self-esteem because you realize you're capable of more than you thought. So that's your challenge. Take it, use it. I'll talk to you again soon.